Hello everyone. This is a video discussing one other element of the pre-writing stage, which to me, before we do anything else, let me tell you, pre-writing, if you think about the acronym PADRE, imagine the word PADRE written vertically up and down, and the P stands for pre-writing. This is the first stage of the writing process, all the stuff you do before you can actually sit down and draft anything. So the P for pre-writing encompasses a lot of things. It encompasses thinking on paper if you know anything about the subject that you're writing about. It encompasses some of the other things that we've already talked about, such as doing preliminary research to see what's out there, to see what the issues are, what the controversies are, what the claims are on a given topic. In this case, we're writing about the subject of happiness. The example that you see here is a pre-writing exercise on a different topic to illustrate the point. And I want to talk a little bit about that because it's really important to think on paper if you know anything about anything that you're writing about. Now, a lot of times in school we don't. It's a research paper for a reason because we don't have all the answers. We maybe just have the questions. We have to use those questions to drive our research, and then we draw our own conclusions, and then we build a case or an argument from that. But when we pre-write, you're just thinking on paper. And I'm going to highly encourage you to do this exercise. I usually assign it, but I'm going to leave it off the table for right now. But it's really useful, and I think it's important. And if you do it, and you want to lobby for some extra credit, well then let's talk about it, and I will certainly apply that because this is a really practical assignment. I try to make sure that all of your assignments are really practical and that they serve a purpose in helping you to produce a good paper. But I'm going to share with you my 3 favorite techniques for coming up with ideas. Now, in this case, I used the subject of courage just because I didn't want to mess with anybody's thinking on the subject of happiness just yet. And so the first technique is just to list as many questions as you possibly can without judging yourself, and you're not even worried about whether you can answer them or not. And so if I looked at the subject of courage here, I'm asking myself, well, how is it even cultivated or developed to begin with? And are some people naturally fearless, naturally courageous? And then I want to know, well, what's the relationship between courage and fear, and so on. So you get it. I'm just listing, what I think to be are thoughtful questions, but they're not all going to be great or amazing questions. But I'm, asking things like, can it be taught? Can it be practiced? What's the difference between courage and bravery? So no judgment, and you just list as many as you can. And so I listed about 17. It took me about an hour and a half to do this little thing right here on courage. So first of all I did was list, many questions as I could without judging myself on that subject. And then in the second part, I picked a handful. Like which of those seemed like most interesting to me, that I thought I had something to say, or that I would be able to figure out what I thought about that if I made myself write a paragraph. So then I picked those, and then I answered those. So I asked, are there circumstances that make it easier to be courageous? And I wrote about that. And then, I picked some other questions that I had on there and answered those. So this is a form of exploratory writing where you're not doing it to impress anybody. You're doing it to kind of get your thoughts out and to see if anything emerges through your pre-writing that could lend itself to either a research question that might lead to you discovering a research angle, topic, giving you a sense of direction, or sometimes if you're lucky, you'll actually come up with a working thesis that's already debatable and that you already have a pretty good idea that I think I'm going to be able to find sources on this. And that actually happened to a student of mine in one of my face-to-face classes this last week. We did a writing prompt at the very beginning of class, and when I was asking him what he thought about that, the first line out of his mouth, he says, well, I think happiness is a mindset. He said, I think it's the way you perceive things, the way you process things, or whatever. And I said, well, there you go. I said, you got a thesis right there. I said, that'll work for the very first prompt on the assignment sheet to write an argument of definition, because he's claiming, oh, I think it's a mindset. So he's not defining it as an emotion or, necessarily as a state of being or whatever. He says, oh, it's largely a product of your thinking. And I said, well, I already know you can sustain that. And so he literally stumbled on a possibility on a little, 5 to 7 minute writing prompt. And that was the first thing he said when we discussed it. So that's the value too of just pre-writing, is that you can come up with some pretty cool things. So that's one technique, just questioning, list a bunch of questions, as many as you can. Don't judge yourself. Pick a handful that seem interesting to you and force yourself to write about those, and, there's not a certain length, but, most of mine are a paragraph or two. And then I went on to brainstorming, and I kind of probably didn't apply myself as much as I could here, but I listed as many things as came to mind as I could. And again, no judgment. And you'll see that I'll have things on my brainstorming list that might seem silly or dumb. And so when I was thinking about courage for this example, I thought about the Cowardly Lion in the Wizard of Oz, and I thought about Courage the Cowardly Dog, which was a cartoon show that used to be on years ago when my daughter was little. And, so I'm trying to think about anything that, might be, it's just popping to mind. So I'm listing it on the list, and then some of the things that I'm listing are just claims that I believe to be true. Like bravado isn't the same thing as courage. That really successful people in life seem to have more courage or less fear than the average person. Just observations, just brainstorming. So I didn't put a lot there, but I probably should have put more. And then my other favorite technique is free writing, and it is what it sounds like it is. It's writing freely without stopping, without judgment, and it's going to be a hot mess most likely. You're not trying to write a pretty perfect paragraph or anything. You just write for either a predetermined amount of time or until the ideas stop, whichever happens. When I'm in class with students, what I usually do is I'll set a timer for 6 or 7 minutes, and I'll say, all right, I want you to write for 6 minutes or 7 minutes on the topic of happiness, whatever pops to mind. Don't judge yourself, go. And you can't pick up your pen, you can't stop, you can't stare at the page for 5 minutes and write for one. You have to write the whole time. So you may start writing about one thing and then, segue to something else and circle back. And so the point is not a paragraph. The point is to get your ideas out on paper. And so here's what I got done in 6 minutes for that first part. So I got kind of a meaty paragraph that's all over the place. And then, so that's free writing. And then focused free writing is when you take one little nugget that you found interesting, or that you thought, if I had to, I could probably write 6 more minutes on just that thing. And so in this one, I gravitated toward this one where I pointed out that it doesn't seem like people really like to talk about courage or fear very openly. Kind of hide that, guard that. And so then I did focused free writing on that for 6 minutes. So this was my whole little pre-writing exercise on another topic, just to illustrate the process. If I were doing this on happiness, then obviously I would list a bunch of questions about happiness, many as I could think of. Then I would answer some, trying to really explore my thoughts there. Then I would do some brainstorming, and then I would end with some free writing and focused free writing. It's actually kind of fun, and I don't know, I like this. I have a lot of students that like this too, and they're like, oh, I really liked this assignment. Number one, it's easy points if you do it in the right spirit, but I never assign this really with the intention of the points per se, but just because it's good to do. I really think it's a good practice to do on the subject of happiness. You may end up coming up with something off the top of your head that is interesting to write about. That's one of the things that I like about questions. Sometimes your questions really, lead to, interesting, very interesting things. So that's what pre-writing is. I'm going to encourage you to do it. If you decide to do this for happiness and you want to trade that in for some extra credit, well then by all means do so. You can tell me, hey, Ms. Bell, I did that, and I'll create a link and so I can collect that from the people that do it, and the people that don't do it, I'll just exempt you from that because it's exploratory and it's meant to be helpful. So this is the last part of what I want to talk about for now. At this point, we're just reading the hypothesis assignments and doing that, and you should start doing some exploratory research, and all of this to come up with one sentence, your working thesis statement, an idea for a working thesis statement, which is a claim. It's got to be a debatable claim. It could be something like happiness is overrated, or the pursuit of happiness is the surest way not to find it, or whatever the case may be. But you got to kind of look at a lot of things and think about a lot of things before you kind of settle on something, unless you're lucky and the stars align, and then you kind of stumble onto something fairly quickly. But it can be a pretty efficient process if you kind of invest a little effort and also choose something that you're interested in. That'll make it a lot easier for you to put in the work on this next essay. That's it. That's a wrap. Y'all have a good one. Let me get this one out, and I'll talk to you soon.